The Habit Breaker System, the Kaizen Strategy. Chapter 1. The Snap in the Flower Breed. On all fours, palms slamming into the damp earth, mud mixing with ice-cold sweat. Christopher could hear his own ragged breathing. It didn't sound human. It sounded like a wounded animal whimpering, trying to find a way to survive. He hadn't tripped. He hadn't been hit by a sudden injury. The truth was simple. The legs of this 40-year-old, 313-pound man had just betrayed him. They froze completely, powerless, entirely unable to lift the massive weight of his body back to a standing position. Beside him, his 9-year-old son stood in absolute silence. There were no tears in the boy's eyes, only pure, unadulterated terror at watching his hero collapse. And from across the fence, the neighbor rushed over, extending a hand with a look of deep pity. That was the exact moment Christopher knew he had hit rock bottom. Before that fateful day, Christopher always kept a running list of excuses for everything. It's just bad genetics. Everyone in my family is big. My metabolism is just incredibly slow. I'm drowning in work and bills. Who has time to exercise? He was a model warehouse logistics manager, or more accurately, a glorified pack mule. He left the house at 5 a.m. before the sun even hit the horizon, and dragged his exhausted body back through the front door at 7 p.m. 2 growing kids, a wife working herself to the bone, and a stack of utility bills and tuition notices waiting on the kitchen table. He was the poster child for the middle-class worker, killing himself to provide for his family, while completely forgetting he owned a body. His eating habits boiled down to 2 words: convenience and mindlessness. Breakfast was a sloppy, sauce-dripping sandwich shoved into his mouth while white-knuckling the steering wheel in gridlock. Traffic. Lunch was a quick takeout container eaten at his desk, one hand flying across the keyboard, the other shoveling food. Dinner? Returning home completely drained, he would crash onto the couch, a slice of greasy, cheese-laden pizza in one hand, an ice-cold beer in the other, eyes glued to the TV. To soothe his guilt, he would tell himself, "I earned this. I worked like a dog all day." But his body didn't care about his excuses. It had been flashing red alerts for a long time. He had just chosen to look the other way. Climbing a mere 3 steps sent his heart hammering against his ribs, his chest tight and aching. Tying his shoes every morning had evolved into a major engineering project. He had to sit flat on a chair, catch his breath, suck in his gut, and strain his entire lower back just to reach the laces. When his 7-year-old daughter, Emily, begged him to play hide-and-seek, he brushed her off because he was too tired. When his wife asked to go for a walk in the park on weekends, he refused because he just wanted to sleep. But the deepest wound wasn't the skyrocketing numbers on the scale. It was the moment he realized Emily's eyes had changed. One day she walked past the sofa, looked at him, and quietly turned around to play by herself. She stopped asking him. She had learned a brutal truth. Her dad didn't know how to play. Christopher saw it all, felt the ache of it, but chose to give up because he had tried to change too many times and failed. 3 annual gym memberships abandoned after 2 months max. 3 weeks of a brutal zero-carb diet that only triggered an even more vicious binge afterward. 5 days of waking up early to jog, before sliding right back into the old routine. He had fallen into the most dangerous swamp of behavioral psychology, learned helplessness. He labeled himself, "I'm just an undisciplined failure." Until that Saturday morning. Christopher was sitting on a plastic lawn chair, frozen like a statue, watching his son kick a soccer ball alone. The ball flew off course, landing dead center in the neighbor's flower bed. "Dad, can you get it for me?" Christopher stood up heavily, dragging his weight across the property line. He bent down. And that was when his entire world shattered. His legs shook, his thighs cramped violently, and he collapsed. That night, the 40-year-old man sat motionless on the edge of the bed, burying his face in his lined hands, weeping silently. He wasn't crying from physical pain. He was crying because he realized he had just branded a horrific memory into his son's mind. My dad is weak. My dad is a helpless man who can't even stand up on his own 2 feet. His wife walked into the room. She didn't offer lectures or blame. She just quietly sat beside him, wrapping her arms around his shaking shoulders. Leaning close, she spoke in a whisper that cut through the dark. "You need real help, Chris. I can't lose you." Chapter 2, The Psychological Surgeon. On Sunday morning, Christopher called the only person he knew who had successfully transformed. Marcus, a former co-worker who used to weigh just as much as him, but now looked like an entirely different human being. It wasn't just that he was lean. Marcus radiated a calm, scented energy. The energy of a man completely in control of his life. The exact thing Christopher had lost long ago. "Marcus, did you get lipo? What pills are you on? Tell me, because I'm losing my mind here." There was a long beat of silence on the other end of the line. Then Marcus's voice dropped serious. "I went to a doctor, Chris. But not the kind who writes prescriptions or sucks out fat. He didn't give me a diet plan. He gave me a philosophy." "How is a philosophy going to torch this fat, Marcus? I need a practical solution." Chris snapped, desperation bleeding into his tone. "You're wrong, Chris. That quick-fix practical solution mindset is exactly what's killing you. Just go see him." The following Tuesday morning, Christopher found himself sitting in an oddly minimalist clinic on the outskirts of town. It looked nothing like a doctor's office. No intimidating anatomical posters, no sharp stench of rubbing alcohol, no high-tech medical scales. The room held nothing but a cedar desk, 2 armchairs, and a massive glass window looking out onto a quiet, lush green garden. Dr. Takeshi Yamamoto walked in. He was around 65 years old, thin with a razor-straight posture. Every step and gesture was slow, deliberate, and entirely unhurried. He looked more like a Zen master than a physician. "Christopher, what brings you to this chair?" Yamamoto asked, his voice low and flat like a still lake. Chris unloaded. He talked about the 313-pound cage pinning him to a swamp of helplessness, the nightly cravings for pizza and beer, the humiliation in the neighbor's yard, and the haunted look in his son's eyes. He braced himself for a brutal starvation regimen, a mile-long list of blood work, or a stern lecture on his lazy blue-collar lifestyle. But Dr. Yamamoto didn't even open a laptop. He didn't touch a pen. He simply interlocked his fingers, looked straight into Chris' eyes, and asked, "How many times have you tried to lose weight?" "About 3 or 4 times, I lost count." "And how long did you last each time?" 2 months max." "Usually just a few weeks before I threw in the towel." Yamamoto nodded, entirely unsurprised. "Do you know why you always fail?" Chris started rolling out his old playlist of excuses: lack of time, work stress, bad genetics, a shot metabolism. The doctor raised a hand, gently cutting him off. His words dropped like a scalpel, slicing straight into the core of human behavior. "No, you fail because you are trying to use a 2-month battle to win a 40-year war. It took your body 40 years to accumulate this weight. It took your brain 40 years to wire those destructive habits. And you think you can wipe it all clean in a few weeks using pure willpower. Willpower is a finite resource, Christopher. The more you draw from it, the faster it drains. When you are exhausted from work, willpower is the very first thing to vanish. That is why every extreme attempt at change collapses." The room fell into an absolute hush. Yamamoto's words shattered every illusion Chris had been clinging to. Yamamoto leaned forward, a flash of deep empathy in his eyes. "Now I have a proposal. I want you to make one change starting today. An action so incredibly small you will think I am mocking you. An action completely meaningless for a 13-pound man. Do you have the courage to accept it?" Chris clenched his fists, driven by the raw desperation of a man with nowhere left to turn. "I'll do it, whatever it is. You name it, Doc. Good. Starting tomorrow. The absolute first thing you do when you wake up, before your feet even touch the floor, is drink a full glass of water left on your nightstand. That is all." Christopher stared, blinking, waiting for the punchline. Where was the low-carb rule? The 5-mile morning run schedule? There was nothing. Just a glass of water. For how long, doctor? 2 weeks. Absolutely nothing else. Eat your pizza, drink your beer, lay on the couch and watch TV all you want. I do not care. But in the morning, you must drink that glass of water. Chris felt a wave of anger tightening his chest. He felt like he had just thrown away $200 on a joke, doctor. Yamamoto, with all due respect, I need to torch over 110 pounds of fat just to stay alive. What on earth is a glass of water going to solve? Yamamoto smiled, a quiet, powerful smile. You are right. Physically, a glass of water will not drop an ounce of fat. But neurologically, it does something 10,000 times more critical. It proves to your damaged brain that you are capable of keeping a single promise to yourself. And that, Christopher, is the only thing you are missing right now. Chapter 3: The Cravings of the Identity Monster. Christopher walked out of Dr. Yamamoto's clinic, his temples throbbing with frustration. His mind raced with the distinct feeling that he had just been conned. $200. For advice a 5-year-old knows. Drink water. Is he playing games with my life? He gripped the steering wheel, fully intending to pull into the nearest fast food drive-thru, order a massive greasy fried chicken combo and a large foaming cola to vent his frustration. That was his hardwired coping mechanism for stress. But just as his hand moved to shift gears, the old doctor's voice echoed in his head, slow, calm, and sharp as a blade. It will prove to your brain that you are capable of keeping a single promise to yourself, a promise to himself. Chris froze. How many times had he promised himself he would change on a Sunday night, only to dive headfirst into junk food by Wednesday morning? How many times had he betrayed his own word? If he couldn't even commit to a single glass of water in the morning, what right did he have to dream of losing 110 pounds? Tối hôm đó với một sự hoài nghi tột độ, Christopher lặng lặng rót một ly nước đầy, đặt nó ngay ngắn trên chiếc bàn cạnh giường ngủ. 5 a.m. the next morning. The alarm blared, cutting through the silence. By old instinct, Christopher's heavy body wanted to sink right back into the mattress, his brain already whining for reasons to delay. But just as he went to close his eyes, he caught sight of the glass of water. He sat up, picked up the glass, and drank it dry. The cool water sliding down his parched throat in the chilly dawn brought a strange, sudden clarity. But a second later, the old identity monster inside him reared its head, mocking him. See? No miracle. You're still fat, still exhausted, and still a failure. Day 2, then day 3, the internal warfare raged on. Every morning was a battle against the feeling of absurdity. But by day 7, a quiet miracle occurred. He woke up a minute before the alarm even vibrated. His first instinct wasn't to grab his phone, nor was it a craving for a sugary pastry. His brain automatically asked, "Where is my glass of water?" His brain had begun to expect it. On the 14th day, Christopher pushed open the door to Yamamoto's office. This time his shoulders felt lighter, and his eyes held a subtle steadiness. "I did it, Doc, every single day, even though I still feel a little ridiculous, and I didn't lose a single pound," Chris admitted honestly. Dr. Yamamoto smiled and nodded gently. "You are not ridiculous, Christopher. You have successfully executed the first step of Kaizen, the principle of micro-improvements. You bypassed your brain's defense mechanism. When you set a massive looming goal like lose 110 pounds or work out 2 hours a day, your brain panics. It views it as an existential threat to its comfort zone and immediately triggers a massive wave of resistance, forcing you to quit. But a glass of water. Your brain looks at it and thinks, "Oh, this is incredibly easy, there's no danger here." And it lets you pass. Yamamoto stood up, walked to the window, and pointed out toward the quiet garden. In behavioral psychology, that glass of water is what we call a keystone habit. It is the first domino. When this domino falls, it triggers a chain reaction, automatically pulling other habits into alignment, without you having to burn massive amounts of energy. Now, Christopher, are you ready for the second domino? Chris swallowed hard, nodding. I'm ready. Good. Keep drinking the water every morning, but starting tomorrow at every meal, I want you to put only half of your normal portion onto your plate. Half the salad, half the steak, half the carbs. If exactly 20 minutes after you finish eating, you still genuinely feel hungry, you have permission to go back and take the rest. But to start, you only put half on the plate. Christopher was stunned. His insatiable appetite was the greatest enemy of his entire life. Looking at a plate that was half empty felt like pure, unadulterated torture. But looking into the calm, deeply trusting eyes of the old doctor, he could only clench his fists and replied, "I'll do it." Chapter 4. The chilled holds Dad's hand again. Half a plate of food for a 303-pound. Looking at a plate with nothing but empty space on one side was psychological warfare. The first week was a nightmare. The second Christopher put his fork down, the craving demon in his brain started roaring. It screamed at him to get up, walk back to the stove and pile the plate high again. His chest tightened, cold sweat broke out on his forehead, and his stomach gnawed at him as if he had been starved for a week. But he remembered Yamamoto's absolute rule: wait exactly 20 minutes. If you're still hungry after 20 minutes, eat the rest. Christopher sat frozen at the dining table, his eyes locked onto the ticking second hand of the wall clock. Tick-tock. The first 5 minutes dragged by like a century. 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And then, a bizarre phenomenon occurred at minute 18. The frantic, screaming craving suddenly began to quiet down. By minute 20, the gnawing emptiness vanished entirely. His body felt light, comfortable, completely free of the heavy lethargy that usually followed his massive meals. Over the next 3 weeks, he only had to return to the kitchen twice to get more food. It turned out his lifelong hunger was a massive illusion engineered by his brain. It wasn't his stomach crying out for nutrients. It was just a deep-seated habit of mindless overeating indulged for decades. At his next appointment, Christopher stepped onto the clinic scale. The needle swung back. He had lost 6.6 pounds. "Don't worry about the 6.6 pounds, Dr. Yamamoto said, glancing at the chart. What matters isn't the number, it's the trajectory. For the first time in 40 years, your body is moving in the exact direction you want it to." Chris smiled, a quiet sense of pride blooming in his chest. But the old doctor wasn't about to let him coast on a victory. He handed down the next challenge. "Now we introduce a microdose of movement. No jogging, no lifting weights. Every morning, after you finish your glass of water, walk from your front door to the mailbox at the front gate, then walk back inside." Christopher blinked, then burst out laughing. "Yamamoto, that mailbox is less 60 feet from my front door. How many calories could that possibly burn?" Yamamoto looked at him, his expression stern but deeply warm. "I will say it again. This is not an exercise routine. This is how you remind your body that it was biologically engineered to move. Do not force a machine that has been rusting for decades to run at full throttle instantly. Just 60 feet today. Next week your body will naturally want to go further." Christopher did exactly as he was told. The next morning, after draining his glass of water, he opened the front door. The crisp morning air slapped his face. He slowly shuffled his heavy legs out to the mailbox, touched the cold metal, and turned back inside, 60 feet. It felt ridiculous, but he had done it. On the third day of the walking challenge, just as he stepped off the porch, a quiet, hesitant voice called out from behind him, "Daddy, can I come with you?" Christopher turned around. Emily, his 7-year-old daughter, was standing at the door, her fingers laced together, looking up at him in uncertainty. Christopher's heart tightened completely. He opened his arms wide. "Come here, sweetie." She ran over, timidly slipping her small, warm hand into his massive, calloused palm. Together, father and daughter walked down the narrow path toward the mailbox. As they walked, Emily chattered away endlessly, telling him about her grades, her best friend at school, the stray cat hanging around the backyard. These were things she hadn't shared with him in ages, because her dad had always been too busy, too exhausted, and too irritable. When they stepped back onto the porch, Emily looked up, her eyes sparkling. "Can we do this again tomorrow morning, Daddy?" "Yeah, sweetie." "We're going to walk every single morning," Christopher choked out, doing everything he could to swallow the tears threatening to spill over. The next week, Christopher didn't stop at the mailbox. He held his daughter's hand and walked all the way to the intersection at the end of the block, then to the small park down the street. Not because the old doctor forced him to, but because he refused to miss a single second of holding his daughter's hand. By the end of the second month, Christopher had dropped a total of 18 pounds. His frame was still massive, but the heavy wheezing had stopped, and the dull, chronic backaches he woke up with every morning had quietly vanished. Inside the clinic, Dr. Yamamoto looked at Christopher and asked a gentle question. "Christopher, answer me honestly. Why are you putting all this effort in?" "To lose weight, to get healthy, Doc," Chris answered automatically. Yamamoto shook his head. "No, that is just the superficial excuse. What is the real reason hidden deep within your soul?" Christopher went entirely silent. He looked out the window, watching the maple leaves drift through the quiet autumn air. The memory of his absolute helplessness in the neighbor's flower bed, the devastated look on his son's face, and the warmth of Emily's tiny hand came rushing back with vivid clarity. He took a deep, shuddering breath, his voice trembling. "I want to see my kids grow up. I want to have the strength to run around the yard and kick a soccer ball with my son. I want to be the man who walks Emily down the aisle someday, standing straight, tall, and proud as I hand her over to the man she loves. I don't want to be a broken, useless father dying a slow death on a couch anymore." Dr. Yamamoto nodded with profound satisfaction. He spoke, his voice deep and warm. "That, Christopher, is your Ikigai. The Japanese believe everyone is born with an Ikigai, a distinct reason to wake up in the morning. Losing weight isn't your goal. It is merely the vehicle to reach your Ikigai. When you anchor yourself to an emotional bedrock like this, you no longer need short-term willpower. Because every time you want to quit, the vision of walking your daughter down the aisle will pull you back to your feet." Chapter 5: The Thanksgiving Trap. 3 months had passed since the morning Christopher first picked up that glass of water. 30 pounds of pure fat had melted off his frame. His old clothes had begun to hang loosely, sagging off his body like empty burlap sacks. His co-workers at the warehouse constantly slapped him on the back, their eyes wide with shock, demanding to know his secret for looking so sharp and moving so fast. Christopher would just chuckle softly and give a simple answer. "Oh, just a few small adjustments." But life is never a perfectly smooth, straight line. It is always waiting in ambush, ready to throw a lethal curveball the second you start getting complacent. Christopher's curveball was named Thanksgiving. It was a festive Thursday afternoon. His mother's house was thick with the intoxicating aroma of honey-roasted turkey, buttery mashed potatoes, homemade apple pie, and golden fresh-baked cornbread. The entire extended family, more than a dozen people, gathered around a massive long table. The room was loud with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the endless passing of massive platters of food. Christopher picked up his plate. Following the ironclad habit of the last 3 months, he intended to take only half of his usual portions. He intentionally loaded up on green vegetables and selected a single thin slice of turkey breast. But the moment he set his fork down, his mother, a woman whose love was measured entirely in food portions, stared at his plate, her brow furrowing with deep worry. "Chris, what on earth are you eating? Are you sick? Why is your plate covered in nothing but rabbit food?" Before he could even open his mouth to answer, his brother-in-law sitting across the table hoisted a foaming mug of beer, smirked, and let out a loud laugh, "Oh, come on, Chris, it's Thanksgiving. Who diets on Thanksgiving? Just live a little for one night. You can just burn it off tomorrow, it won't kill you." Instantly, every single eye at the table locked onto him. The teasing, the urging, and the collective pressure rolled in like a heavy, suffocating wave. In behavioral psychology, this is a fatal trap: peer pressure. When you fight to change your life for the better, the people around you, even the ones who love you most, often possess an unconscious urge to pull you back into your old mold. Not because they malice you, but because your transformation inadvertently acts as a mirror reflecting their own stagnation. It makes them deeply uncomfortable with their own bad habits. Christopher began to waver, his throat went completely dry. The rich scent of garlic butter hit his nose, aggressively waking the craving monster that had merely been sleeping, never truly gone. Well, just one night won't hurt, right? It's a holiday. I've worked incredibly hard for 3 months straight. I deserve a reward. The familiar, toxic voice whispered in his ear. Chris picked up the serving spoon. He scooped a massive mound of mashed potatoes, drowning it in rich gravy. Then a piece of crispy fried chicken, then a heavy slice of sweet pie. He started eating. The first few bites were hesitant, but then the explosion of sugar and fat hit his palate, causing his brain to absolutely explode with dopamine. He ate like a man dying of thirst who had stumbled upon a freshwater spring. He ate continuously, mindlessly, completely blowing past every stop signal his body tried to send, until his stomach was stretched to the point of literal pain. 10 p.m., the party was over. Christopher stood in front of the mirror in his mother's guest bathroom, staring at his face, flushed red from beer, and his stomach bloating heavily underneath his shirt. A wave of pure disgust and intense shame rushed up, suffocating him. The dopamine high had evaporated completely, leaving behind a hollow, agonizing pit of guilt. "See?" The toxic voice in his head jeered with delight. "You failed again. The last 3 months were nothing but a joke. Your core identity is just an undisciplined, obese failure. The streak is broken anyway. Just give up." The next morning, Black Friday. The alarm went off at 5 a.m. The glass of water sat there, completely undisturbed on the nightstand. But Christopher couldn't bring himself to sit up. He grabbed the blanket and pulled it entirely over his head. He felt heavy, broken, and worst of all, he couldn't face that glass of water. He had broken a promise to himself. He had fallen squarely into the what the hell effect. The psychological phenomenon where making a minor slip causes the brain to abandon all discipline, entirely, operating under the illusion that everything is already ruined. Christopher lay there, paralyzed by guilt for 2 solid hours. But just as he was about to close his eyes to drift back into escape, Dr. Yamamoto's words flashed in his mind, "You will stumble many times over. And when it happens, that is when you will truly know if you have changed." Summoning the absolute last shred of his self-respect, Christopher bolted upright. He grabbed his phone, his thumbs trembling as he typed out a text to Dr. Yamamoto. "Doc, I ruined everything. I binged out completely last night. I don't think I have what it takes to keep going." 2 minutes later, his screen lit up with a brief, razor-sharp reply from Yamamoto. "This afternoon, 3 p.m., come to the clinic." Chapter 6, Wabi-sabi and the grit to rise after a fall. The heavy cedar door of the clinic closed behind Christopher, instantly swallowing the chaotic noise of the city outside. The room remained exactly as peaceful as before. The late afternoon sun filtered through the massive glass window, painting the wooden desk and the minimalist corners of the room in a warm gold. Christopher slumped heavily into his usual chair. His shoulders sagged completely, his hands were locked together, and his head was bowed low. He couldn't bring himself to look the old doctor in the eye. He was bracing for a lecture, a look of profound disappointment, or a stern dressing down about his lack of discipline. Dr. Yamamoto maintained his serene composure. He slowly poured a cup of hot tea, placed it gently in front of Christopher, and sat down opposite him. "Tell me exactly what happened last night," Yamamoto asked, his voice entirely flat, devoid of a single ounce of judgment. Christopher took a deep, shaky breath, his voice catching in his throat, raspy and raw. "I ruined everything, Doc. Thanksgiving. Everyone was eating, laughing, having a great time. They told me I was being eccentric, that I was starving myself, and I caved. I ate like a madman, mashed potatoes, fried chicken, pie. I shoved food down my throat until my chest felt like it was going to burst open. I completely violated the half-plate rule. I betrayed everything I built over the last 3 months." Yamamoto sat in absolute silence, letting Chris empty his chest. He waited until Christopher's ragged breathing finally settled, then asked a precise question. "When you woke up this morning, did you drink your water?" Christopher paused, then gave a slight nod. "Yes. I lay in bed crying for 2 hours, but before I got up, I drank the whole glass. And the walk to the mailbox? I did it. But what does it even matter anymore, Doc? I packed thousands of calories of garbage into my system last night. What difference does a 60-foot walk make? It's a drop in the ocean." Yamamoto smiled gently. He leaned forward, his sharp, piercing eyes locking dead onto Christopher's. "The difference is that you are still moving. Christopher, you have not failed. You merely stumbled. There is a life or death distinction between stumbling and falling. When you are climbing a steep, rocky trail and you accidentally trip, lose your balance for a split second, but then steady your feet and keep climbing, that is a stumble. A fall is when you trip and you choose to just lie there in the dirt, throw your hands up, and let your body roll down the cliffside. Last night, you tripped at the dinner table. But this morning, you still drank your water, and you still dragged your feet to the mailbox. That means you are still standing, and you are still moving forward." The old doctor pointed to the rustic, coarse ceramic teacup sitting on the desk. The cup had a small, visible crack running down its side, but it had been meticulously mended with a delicate, beautiful line of gold lacquer. It was the traditional Japanese art of kintsugi. Concept breakdown: wabi-sabi and kintsugi. We Japanese have a deep philosophy called wabi-sabi, the practice of finding and celebrating the profound beauty in things that are imperfect, fractured, and weathered by time. A teacup that has been cracked and mended with gold does not lose its worth. On the contrary, it becomes completely unique, carrying a narrative of resilience. Your journey of identity transformation operates on the exact same law. It is not a flawless, sterile, straight line. You will have days of intense cravings, days of laziness, and days where you buckle under peer pressure. That imperfection is reality. A single day of overeating cannot erase 3 months of waking up at dawn to build a promise. It cannot instantly bring back the 30 pounds of fat you torched. Christopher stared intently at the gleaming golden seam on the ceramic cup. Something rigid, heavy and toxic that had been crushing his chest for decades suddenly dissolved. His extreme perfectionist expectation of a flawless journey. But what if I blow it again during the upcoming holidays? Chris asked, anxiety still bleeding through. "You will blow it again," Yamamoto replied instantly, without a single shred of hesitation. "On Christmas, on your son's birthday, on the days you come home entirely dead from work. You will absolutely stumble many more times. But do you know what the difference is between the Christopher of today and the Christopher of your past? In the past, you used a single micro-mistake as an absolute license to abandon your entire life. Today, you accept the fracture as a natural part of the process, and the next morning, you still get up, drink your water, and walk. That is Gambaru, the philosophy of quiet, unyielding persistence. The capacity to endure and sustain your momentum even on your absolute worst days." Dr. Yamamoto stood up, tapping Christopher gently on the shoulder. "Discipline is not about never making a mistake. Discipline is the raw capacity to get back on track as fast as humanly possible. Today, Christopher, you did exceptionally well. Go home, hug your daughter, and keep walking." Christopher stood up. This time his spine was straighter, his steps remarkably firmer. He finally understood that he didn't need to be a flawless superhero who never tripped. He just needed to be an ordinary man who accepted his own cracks and always found a way to stand up after a slip. Chapter 7, From Behavior to Identity. 9 months after his very first step into Dr. Yamamoto's minimalist clinic, Christopher stood in front of a full-length mirror in his company's main hallway. He froze for a few seconds, staring at his reflection, genuinely wondering who the man looking back at him was. The 313-pound warehouse manager with a grey face, heavy dark circles under his eyes, and a work uniform constantly threatening to rip at the seams was gone. The man standing in the mirror was trim, his shoulders broad and firm underneath a crisp, neatly pressed button-down shirt that was tucked perfectly into his trousers. He had torched 77 pounds, his skin possessed a healthy flush, his eyes were sharp and clear, and his posture was dead straight, a physical stance he couldn't have achieved in his wildest dreams. 9 months ago. And the transformation hadn't stopped with his body. It had slowly bled into every single corner of his existence, like fresh water tracking through dry ground. At the shipping warehouse where Christopher had resigned himself to being a mindless pack mule for 15 long years, he began quietly applying the Kaizen strategy. Instead of accepting the daily chaos of the floor, he dedicated exactly 10 minutes every single day to optimizing the layout of a single inventory shelf. Just a 1% improvement per day. After 6 months, the warehouse's shipping error rate plummeted to near absolute zero, and operational speed doubled. The month prior, executive leadership officially bypassed seniority lines to promote him to regional logistics director. During his routine check-in, Christopher excitedly shared the news with Yamamoto. He asked, deeply perplexed, "Doc, I honestly don't understand it. Before, every single time I tried to diet or hit the gym, it was a brutal, agonizing mental war. My brain was constantly screaming for junk food, just waiting for an excuse to quit. But now, eating in moderation and going for my walks feels as natural as drawing breath. I don't feel like I'm trying or forcing myself anymore. Why is that?" Dr. Yamamoto poured water into 2 clean glasses, handed one to Christopher, and explained slowly, "Because you have successfully shifted from changing behavior to changing identity. There is a legendary study conducted by neuroscientists at University College London tracking the mechanics of habit formation. The human brain is evolutionarily lazy. It is constantly seeking to automate behaviors to conserve metabolic energy. When you first started, your brain viewed a simple glass of water or a short walk as a foreign disruption, a threat that required massive amounts of willpower to execute. But willpower operates exactly like a phone battery. You drain it all day long at work, dealing with stress and family, and by nightfall it is completely tapped out. That is precisely why people always break their discipline at night." Yamamoto tapped his temple lightly. "But when you persistently repeat those micro-actions completely underneath your brain's neurological resistance threshold, your nervous system literally rewires its architecture. When a behavior is repeated enough times, it ceases to be a chore, it becomes your identity. 9 months ago, you were a fat guy trying to lose weight. Back then, every single decision to turn down a slice of pizza was a brutal torture of willpower. Today, you are simply a man who takes care of himself. Choosing clean food is a given because it aligns with who you are. You no longer draw from your willpower battery. It has become your core identity." Christopher sat in silence, letting the realization wash over him. The old doctor was entirely right. Now, when he looked at a plate of greasy fries, his system naturally issued a signal of rejection, not out of forced deprivation, but out of a total lack of desire. Another landmark study at Stanford proved, Yamamoto continued, that the human brain violently resists abrupt, extreme identity overhauls. When you try to flip your entire lifestyle 180 degrees in a single day, the amygdala fires an emergency alarm throwing you into a state of high stress and intense cravings to compensate for the perceived energy crisis. But with Kaizen, you move in increments of 1% a day. You step so lightly, so quietly, that your brain's alarm system never even realizes a change is taking place. Until one day, your entire neural network has been completely reprogrammed. Christopher looked down at the glass of water in his hand, then up at the doctor who had quietly salvaged his life. He spoke softly. "I get it now. Kaizen isn't a weight loss method at all. It's a silent revolution inside the human brain." Chapter 8: The Legacy of a Man Who Stood Up. 18 months, 540 days. That was the exact duration of time required for Christopher to permanently purge 115 pounds of excess fat from his frame, bringing his body mass down from a red alert 313 pounds to a lean, strong, and deeply healthy 198 pounds. But those biological metrics paled in comparison to the scene unfolding at the city's Central Park on a breezy, sunlit Saturday afternoon. "Gotcha, Daddy." Emily let out a loud, ringing laugh that echoed across the grass. Christopher laughed along with her, scooping his 9-year-old daughter up in his arms and spinning her around on the vibrant green lawn. He wasn't wheezing. His lungs expanded and contracted with rhythmic, effortless ease, and his joints worked smoothly, like a perfectly tuned machine. A short distance away, his 14-year-old son sprinted toward them, spiraling a football through the air. Christopher caught it with a sharp, practiced movement. His wife sat on a wooden park bench beneath the shade of a maple tree, quietly closing her book. She watched the three of them, tears of complete fulfillment welling up in her eyes. She had waited a decade for this exact moment, the moment the man she married truly came back to her. It wasn't just the return of a leaner body, it was the full, vibrant, and energetic presence of a true husband and father. Another father walking nearby slowed his pace, watching Christopher with open admiration before walking over and asking quietly, "Hey, Chris, man, I remember a year or so ago you were, well, how do I say it nicely? You were pretty huge, right? How did you pull off a transformation like this? What's the secret? Some kind of crazy diet plan or miracle pill?" Christopher stopped the ball. He looked at the man, then glanced down at his own hand, the hand that automatically picked up a glass of water every single morning before doing anything else. He smiled softly and shook his head. "There's no miracle pill. It was just a single glass of water at 5 a.m. The man burst out laughing, assuming Chris was joking. "Oh, come on, man. Are you kidding me?" Christopher didn't push the point. He just maintained his warm smile. Because he knew that people who spend their entire lives chasing magic bullets, 21-day crash diets, or insane, extreme workout programs would never comprehend the sheer, unshakable power of micro-actions repeated with relentless momentum. Christopher's profound identity shift had triggered a powerful chain reaction inside his own home. There is a well-known law in behavioral science. Transformation is rarely directly contagious, but it is highly permissive. When you possess the raw courage to stand up and overhaul your own existence, you inadvertently grant everyone around you permission to do the exact same thing. His son, in the midst of his rebellious 14th year, had begun waking up early on his own accord to do push-ups and runs without a single word of prompting, simply because he had witnessed his father doing it every single day. His wife had begun dedicating 15 minutes every night to quiet meditation to decompress from work, stress. The family had permanently abandoned those dark evenings spent glued to the TV screen with greasy pizza boxes. They had been replaced by evening walks around the neighborhood, talking, listening, and truly connecting. That night, after the kids were asleep, Christopher stood in front of the living room wall. Hanging there were 2 framed photos. Left frame 2 years ago. 313-pound man sitting helplessly on a plastic lawn chair in the backyard, his eyes hollow with exhaustion and defeat, watching his children play alone. Right frame 1 month ago, a candid shot snapped by his wife. Christopher laying flat on the living room floor, laughing radiantly as he builds a complex Lego set with his son, while Emily playfully balances on his back. Two photographs, two completely different lives. A boundary line drawn not by grand, sweeping decisions, but by 540 glasses of water at dawn, by plates left half empty, and by persistent, unyielding steps to the mailbox, rain or shine. Emily walked up beside him, wrapping her arms around his waist and resting her head against his firm shoulder. "Daddy, yesterday at school, my teacher asked everyone who their hero was. I raised my hand and told the whole class, my hero is my dad. He's the most disciplined person I know." Christopher pulled his daughter tight against his chest, his ribs shaking with deep emotion. This, right here, was the true legacy he was leaving behind for his children. Not a massive bank account, not hollow, hypocritical lectures. His legacy was living, breathing proof, an ironclad testament carved into his children's minds. That change is entirely possible, that if you simply keep a promise to yourself, you can be completely reborn from the ashes of failure. Dear friend, if you have possessed the patience to read Christopher's narrative down to these final words, it means that deep within your own soul, there is a fracture that is begging to be mended. Perhaps it is a lifelong battle with your weight, an addiction that is actively dismantling your health, or simply the paralyzing grip of procrastination that is slowly eating away at your potential every single day. You might be whispering to yourself right now, my situation is different. I'm far busier, I'm weaker, and my circumstances are much more hopeless than Christopher's. No, your environmental variables might be different, but your brain and Christopher's operate on the exact same biological operating system. You do not fail because you are uniquely weak or inherently devoid of willpower. You fail because you are relying on a fundamentally broken system. You are trying to win a 10-year war in a matter of 10 days. You are trying to transform yourself into a flawless superhero overnight, and when your mind and body inevitably collapse under the strain, you brand yourself a failure. Stop that war of self-destruction immediately. Let the Kaizen strategy guide you. I am not asking you to draft a grand sweeping plan or a massive, overwhelming goal that you will inevitably abandon by next week. I am asking you for a micro-commitment, an action so completely, absurdly small that you cannot engineer a single logical excuse to delay it. Do not try to map out a massive weight loss journey or a flashy blueprint for a new life. Start right now with an actionable step. Leave a comment below this text declaring the single smallest, most ridiculous micro-action you commit to executing tomorrow morning. A single glass of water, 5 push-ups, opening a book and reading exactly 1 page. Activate your commitment right now. The momentum of an entirely new life is waiting for you on the other side of that very first micro step.